that's the theme, I guess, for the rest of this discussion. So I'm going to hand over to Brian in a second now to talk to you a little bit more detail about that specifically. But we've also got our first polling question, and that's really about your reporting. What best describes your reporting? Do you do none, or is it right down to fully scheduled and flexible reporting that you deliver? And as I mentioned, we can provide you with information. Looking at the moment that 13% of you have no reporting at all, where 14% of you have the full gamut of scheduled and flexible reports. Okay, so that's the sort of introduction and setting the scene. I'm going to hand over to Brian Henry, who's going to take you through discussing in much more detail what kind of reporting you might actually achieve from your service catalogue. Brian.
Thank you, Barclay. Yes, as Barclay said, we're now going to start looking at some types of reporting and look at maybe some of the benefits and tips for implementation of reporting and metrics within your organization. So the first question really we want to ask is, why do we actually have metrics in the first place? Seems like an obvious question, but in many cases, if organizations didn't actually have metrics, they'd have to operate basically on gut instinct and feeling, and while quite often that gut instinct and those feelings are perfectly valid and accurate, they aren't always the case, and they can be very inconsistent and very much dependent on the individual's experience. Any decisions that we base on those inaccurate conclusions can be very costly. If we choose the wrong vendor, for example, if we start to measure the wrong or fail to measure the right business results, we can spend a lot of time looking at things that really aren't that important or aren't really the focus that we should be concentrating on. And as we all know, time wasted is money wasted. In any era, let alone just now when money is extremely tight, no organization can really afford to waste either time or money. But actually, by putting in place a few key business metrics, we really can start to gauge the proper reporting, the proper metrics, and start to give information to the business and to IT that is meaningful and helpful. We then need to obviously think about meaningful metrics. It's very good producing reports, but those reports have to be focused. They have to provide good information to IT and the business, and they really need to identify trends and aid decision making. I'm sure everyone's aware of the saying garbage in and garbage out. Very much what we're talking about here. If you have poor data, if you have data that's inaccurate, it's not kept up to date, or not even appropriate, not even the right sort of data, then you're not going to get good metrics out. Yes, it needs to be accurate. Yes, you need to maintain it. But really here, I think what we're trying to focus on is making sure that you have the right type of data in the system or in your systems to allow those trend analysis reports, to allow the reports that come out to be used to help the business and help IT actually make decisions that will help improve the business or make it more efficient. The data really is the lifeblood of good metrics, and without that data, regardless of how good your reports are, without that good, accurate data, the value of the reports is going to be seriously questionable. So we talked about data. What sort of data do we need in the system? And the data itself comes from a number of different areas. One of the areas is actually from the customer, the end user themselves. And we've got a few screenshots here to actually start looking at the sort of data that the users will be inputting to the system by requesting stuff, say, through the service catalog. So on the screen there on that slide, we actually have an example of a service catalog with a number of services that the users can request and the offerings, the requests against those services. As Barclay said earlier, it is very much a case of an intuitive, friendly interface so that the customer or the end user doesn't have to search and hunt around for things. You can basically find what they want very quickly and very easily. Taking that one step further on, then if they choose a particular service, here it's the communication services, then we can start to hone in, to focus on the actual services that they want to request. We have desk phones and mobile phones here. We could click on the mobile phone request there, and that will take us into another screen, which will actually allow us to, or allow the user, the customer, to start entering data about what they want. It also provides there on the top half of the screen good information that is useful to the user about the price of this service and offering, and even a little bit of information about what it is and how long it will take them to actually receive this offering. And on the bottom half of the screen, they can start to add their specific data. Will they require access to emails, as it says there? What's the justification for this particular request? All of this data will be taken into the system, and we can start analyzing this data to allow us to do some of the reporting that we'll be showing you in a couple of slides' time. From an IT perspective, again, there's a number of bits of data that we can put in. We've got some examples here again as well. The first one is service level agreement data. So we have here an example of the type of information that we might want to put into the system regarding SLAs, a short summary of the SLA, a more detailed description which will give them more information about the service, and also a business description. We've said several times throughout this series of webcasts that we need to put service catalog information into the business language. It needs to be in a language that the business, the customer, the end user can understand. Other information that we have here are things like the holiday plan, so which days will this service not be available, and also the hours that the service is provided. So here we can see it's Monday 9 to 5. Other information we can include, we have the ability here to put costs against this particular service, and not just an overall cost, but break it down into the individual cost components. So we can see here we have a contract cost for this particular phone on a monthly basis, the cost of the handset, which is a once-off, and maybe the insurance is a once-off cost as well. That gives us a total cost, which we can see there, and also we might want to put, if we are charging for the services we offer, we can actually put in a price here to allow the users to know what they will pay to actually to get this service. Other information that we can add is demand, and we'll come on to this a little bit later when we start looking at demand management reporting. But here we're able to identify what level of demand we can put against this service. We've broken this one down into different sections of the organization. So on the top line, consultancy, over the month, can demand 10 of these services. Information technology, however, over the year is a total value, so they have $1,000 to spend on these services. So this information is going to be extremely useful when we come to look at the reporting. And the last bit of information, the second last bit of information, sorry, here is visibility. We can actually start to restrict who sees which services. So if it's a particularly advanced cell phone, for example, then we might actually want to restrict that to the senior management or particular business users. We can also, through the service requests, put in some workflow information so that when a request is made, we can actually start or we attach a structured workflow that will drive the delivery of that service from the start to the finish. And this, again, allows us to start looking at a number of different types of reporting for things like service level agreement reporting, where we can measure how long it's taking each stage of this process to actually be completed. So the next polling question then, does your service catalog have both a business and a technical aspect? This is what Berkeley was talking about earlier, and again it stretches from no, we have no service catalog at all, to obviously we have both aspects contained within a single service catalog. Okay. So what we're going to do now is look at some typical types of reports that that organizations might want to produce. We've tried to group them together into some logical types, but I think before we start looking at it, one of the things to remember is that traditionally reporting has been seen as producing hard copy documents, things that we print off and hand around the organization. But today, reporting is capable of much more than that. It can be interactive, it can be flexible, it can be parameter driven, and we can distribute these in a number of different ways. Still on hard copy if we wish, but through the internet, through email, whatever. There's a number of different ways we can actually run and produce these reports. So they're maybe not the static hard copy reports that we used to think about. The first type of report then we're going to look at is demand management reporting. And we've got a few examples here of demand management types reports. Demand management itself obviously deals with the activities that understand and influence the customer demand for services and providing the capacity to meet those demands. Got a short technical issue, I think. Okay, here's the first slide. And really what we're looking at here is the first of the demand management slides. And what this is showing us basically is against a particular service, what the demand is against that service. So over the course of this time period, we can see the number of requests that have been made against that particular service. We're also showing on this graph where those requests came from. Is it from the service desk or is it actually through the service catalog? And now this is obviously beneficial because it gives us a clear idea of the types of demands, the types of requests, the number of requests that are coming against the service on a period of time. So for the start of the month to the end of the month, we can see when it's busiest, we can see when it's quietest. That will allow us to hopefully allow better financial and capacity budgeting, because we know when, following these trends, this service is likely to be heavily requested and when it's not. The next one takes that a little bit further, where again we're still looking at the demand against services. Here we've actually identified it against a number of different services, and what we're measuring here is the requests against that service, either against a budget that we've allocated to that service or a threshold, so it might be a number of requests against that service. So in this one we're saying for the laptop PC example, perhaps we have a budget of $10,000 and we've used about 30% of that budget. Or for the email it might be a number of requests. So we're saying within this time period we can make 100 requests against this email service, and we've currently requested about 40%. This is obviously extremely useful because it takes the previous graph that little bit further. It shows us which services are close to consuming their allocated budgets and thresholds, and allows us to either slow that, hopefully slow that demand, slow the consumption of those services, or request additional funding or number of services so that we will not breach or overspend against these particular services. And the final demand management graph really takes this another step further, where we're looking again against predicted requested costs against budget or threshold. But what we're saying now is this is the picture to date, to this current part of time, and then we're predicting from that how that will look at the end of this reporting period. So again, it's beneficial because it allows us to identify what we're actually spending against particular services, but also we can now say with some degree of certainty, and we predict that at the end of this reporting period, that's what the final number will be. So again, it allows us to either slow the consumption of those services or request additional funding. But again, just this trending information, these metrics which are giving us good, solid information can be used for budgeting for future time periods. So the outcomes from the demand management reporting that we've seen there, what does it allow us to do? Well, it allows us to optimize service design to suit the demand. So we ensure that the individual attributes of a service accurately meet the customer use of that service and what they actually need and when they actually need it. It also allows us to adjust allocation of resourcing so that if we know when it's likely to be busier, we can actually allocate the appropriate resources at that time, be more efficient with when we allocate resources to people. It allows us again perhaps to provide incentives to influence demand. So if we can actually get the business requesting these services when we have perhaps spare capacity or when it's cheaper to request those services, then that allows us to use that spare capacity or make use of cheaper tariffs if they're available. And because we're measuring this information and we know the demand and the likely demand for these services, we can now more accurately approve investments to add the additional capacity because we know what it's going to be, we're fairly sure what it's going to be, and we can size new services and changes to existing services much